In some parts of the world, COVID-19 restrictions are being rolled back or even lifted completely. But in many places, case numbers are rising rapidly again, making the search for effective vaccines and treatments as important as ever. In Colombia, researchers are testing a protein-based medication. Other researchers are looking into alternative vaccines and better protective equipment. Meanwhile, in Uganda, gender inequality has worsened during the pandemic. But first we head to India, where infection rates have been climbing again for the last few weeks.
This Mohalla, or community clinic, is a primary healthcare centre which provides free basic health care. It's one of hundreds of centres in the capital city of Delhi, mostly located in low-income neighbourhoods. During the city's COVID waves, these clinics played a crucial role in raising awareness and providing timely diagnoses. Now, some of these centres are set to provide COVID-19 vaccinations. Dr. Gohar Azad works in one of the city's Mohalla clinics.
People used to feel a little hassled when they had to line up at big centers or hospitals. This move of getting shots at Mohalla clinics will be beneficial, and we will see more and more people come forward, as now it will be much easier to access.
The past few weeks have seen a steady uptick in the number of COVID cases in India. According to public health officials, a large majority of the population has received 2 vaccines, but only 8% of those eligible for booster shots have gotten them. Dr. K. Srinath Reddy says it's not just about the ease of getting a booster shot. There's also a perception that the Omicron variant of the virus won't result in severe illness, as well as the belief that the vaccine won't prevent infections from happening in the first place. But he adds that it's important to keep encouraging people to get the booster shot, because it can prevent a large number of infections from becoming severe.
If the severity of infection is low, then the amount of virus discharge is going to be much less, because the duration of illness is also going to be much less. So you pose a less of a threat to others, especially elderly, vulnerable people in your household or your family.
Even though most of the cases happening now are mild to moderate, the fact that people are getting infected despite being vaccinated or having recovered from an infection is proof enough that they need all the protection they can get against this virus. The pandemic in India is nowhere near over.
COVID-19 has not only had a massive impact on the global economy, but also on gender equality. In Uganda, more girls than boys have dropped out of school than the pandemic, and many women have lost their jobs. Beyond that, police say that domestic violence against women is on the rise.
We come to the district of Kabarole in western Uganda. Fiona Kansimi was a high school student before she got pregnant during the 2-year lockdown. The 20-year-old now has to balance farming and caring for her 9-month-old baby.
When you get pregnant, people say that you brought it on yourself. They think the man has little to do with it. He never has any problems. They say that if he approaches you and you refuse, do you get pregnant? No, you don't.
In Ugandan schools, many female students didn't return after the lockdown. Teacher Ruth Tusimi says that many families stop girls' education if they get pregnant.
For them, they think that when a girl has got pregnant or given birth, that is the end. What comes in their mind is that he or she should go to the father of that child or get married to any other man, because they think that is the end of her.
When it comes to the socio-economic impact, the United Nations says that women are more affected by disease outbreaks than men. Yolesi Masika says that when her partner wanted money during the lockdown, he sold the family's only home and farmland without her consent.
We lost money during the second wave of the pandemic, and I had to return home. I found my husband had sold everything at home, including the house and farmland, and he resorted to drinking. Now I'm struggling to pay the rent without a stable job. I try to work for neighbors to get something to eat and feed my 2 children.
Furthermore, Ugandan police precincts reported that domestic violence rose by almost 30% in the first year of the pandemic. The country's crime report for the 2 years of COVID-19 shows that on average, a woman was killed every 48 hours due to family disputes sparked by alcoholism.
People tend to think by drinking, they put off their stress. And others drink excessively and lose their reasoning. That's why they end up fighting, assaulting children. Then there are people who have different cultures who still perceive that a man is ahead and whatever he does is right.
Culturally speaking, many traditional norms in Uganda discriminate against women. When families lost members to COVID-19, many girls and women shared the agony of losing their loved ones, but didn't inherit a fair share of the family's wealth.
Actually, there are some people who lives without making a will. And that one becomes a problem to the people who will give out the properties of the deceased. When the father has not mentioned that my cow is given to my child, that one will not be given. It will just be given to only men. When the father maybe has written a will and he mentions that my daughters will be given this, that's when they give them. But everything is given to men.
Around the world, activists want women's rights to be protected in the pandemic. They say it's everyone's responsibility to protect the most vulnerable, so that women like Kansimi can receive the support they need, so that they and their children have quality of life.
What do you think of when you hear the word vaccination? Probably about rolling up your sleeve and getting a needle in your arm. But many researchers believe there's a more effective way to give people protection against the COVID-19 virus. We spoke to virologist and academic Jonathan Gershoni from Tel Aviv University about the future of nasal vaccines.
When you're given a standard set of COVID-19 vaccines via injection, it kicks off a response in the cells nearby, causing your immune system to begin producing antibodies against the coronavirus invader. In other parts of your body, the production of longer-term protective cells called memory T cells and B cells begins, creating what's known as systemic immunity.
The response is to generate antibodies of the class IgG, immunoglobulin G, that are able to recognize the infectious agent and knock it out. And this is done at the port of entry, that is to say the muscle or the blood or in our liver and so on and so forth. So that is the systemic immunity.
With the systemic immunity that injected vaccines provoke, the protective components are spread throughout the body's systems. Exposure to SARS-CoV-2, however, happens in a specific place, the upper respiratory tract, and the protective cells and antibodies can take some time to respond to it.
The antibodies that are produced systemically work pretty good in clearing infectious agents systemically. But when we have a situation that the port of entry is in our mucosa, in the lining of our nose, throat, lungs, and gut, then the level of the antibodies there may not be sufficient.
One way to amp up the response would be to apply vaccines via a spray directly to the area where respiratory bugs get into the body. That would create a more localized protection where it's needed most, the port of entry. Kind of like putting guards at the front door of a house to fend off intruders rather than in the attic or the basement. This is called mucosal immunity because it's created in the membranes exposed directly to the outside world. The membranes are packed with a special antibody called IgA.
If you could stimulate an effective dose of IgA, that same protective antibody, but is targeted to the port of entry, to the mucosa, then it should be markedly more effective in preventing infection of those viruses that enter through the mucosa, such as respiratory viruses, such as corona.
Other advantages that nasal sprays have over injections include not having to train personnel as intensely to apply them. And of course, they take needles out of the process entirely. Nobody likes those. So why don't we have nasal vaccines already? What's the holdup?
There are a number of complications. So there is some amount of protective immunity in our nose, not sufficient, from prior exposure. There is a lesser efficiency in take of the vaccine. The pre-existing immunity is viewing the entry of the vaccine as something it somewhat recognizes, not very efficient, and it's reducing the effective dose and level of immunization. It's complicated and more difficult to produce, more difficult to get regulatory. We have less experience.
Getting the amounts right is a big technical challenge.
In the nasal cavity, we have secretion, we sneeze, not everything is being absorbed. There are cilia, there are these hair-like structures that are clearing fluids and reducing the dose, the amount of actual vaccine material that we want to target to our immune system.
Despite those hurdles, progress is being made in the field. More than a dozen candidates are currently in clinical trials. A few are pretty far along.
We do see encouraging results. My assumption is that in the completion of a phase 3 clinical trial, there will be a push to try to introduce the vaccine. And so this could be, I would hope, within the coming next half a year or year.
Because so many people have already been vaccinated via injection, any nasal vaccines approved in the future will in most cases provide updates to protection by kickstarting mucosal immunity, supplementing the underlying systemic immunity provided by injections. It's an approach experts call prime and spike.
On a background of a systemic response, we can introduce a nasal response to fortify the systemic protection which blocks severe disease with reduction of local infection and later transmission.
Although there are still hurdles that nasally administered COVID vaccines must clear, many experts are optimistic at least some will one day see wide use, because they'll make getting regular boosters, also to other respiratory diseases, a simple and painless process.
While some researchers are working to develop new vaccines, others are focusing on improving protective measures. For example, scientists in Spain have developed a mask that alerts users when its CO2 content gets too high.
Since the pandemic outbreak in early 2020, masks have become an indispensable ally in preventing the spread of COVID-19. But in spite of the evidence in favor of them in reducing community transmission, people who have to wear a mask for hours on end agree that it's not always easy.
Some days, especially at the start of the pandemic, I had a headache and felt drowsy. Since you can't breathe as well and you're working all day, you may get more tired than usual.
The CO2 concentration between a person's face and an FFP2 mask is higher than usual because the air that's exhaled gets trapped. Inhaling this carbon dioxide can lead to health effects, such as headache or fatigue.
When I wear the mask for a long time and it's busy, I get tired and my nose and throat get dry. I have to run to the kitchen, drink water, breathe a bit, and get back to work. To help mask wearers avoid these issues, a multidisciplinary research team made up of engineers and chemical scientists from the University of Granada has developed an intelligent mask that alerts wearers on their smartphones when recommended CO2 limits are exceeded.
The intelligent mask has a sensor, meaning a way to measure something in the air between your face and the mask. So this CO2 sensor is equipped with the electronics that will measure the color change in the sensor and transmit that information to a smartphone.
So a standard FFP2 mask can be turned into an intelligent mask that monitors gas concentration by placing a special electronic sticker inside the mask.
The sticker inserted inside the mask is a system that consists of two parts. On one side, there's what's called readout electronics, which is printed with conductive ink on a flexible plastic and transparent substrate, as you can see. On the other side is the chemical part of the sensor that changes its color depending on the CO2 concentration.
To notify users if they've reached the recommended CO2 limits inside the mask, the research team has designed a special mobile app.
The user has a mobile app to read the carbon dioxide concentration. With NFC technology, the same technology used for wireless payments, users would simply have to hold their smartphone close to the mask. It automatically detects this sticker and reads the CO2 concentration inside the mask. The software alerts users through a traffic light display, red or green, if they need to ventilate.
Although mask mandates have been lifted in many countries, many workers are still required to wear them. So the researchers believe there's a demand. The team is willing to transfer the technology to any industry that may be interested in it.
And like every week, DW science correspondent Derek Williams answers your questions about the latest research. You can write to him at covidproducer@dw.com. This week, an anonymous viewer wanted to know what's the rebound effect that can occur after taking antiviral treatments.
To explain this phenomenon, we first have to talk about Paxlovid, the antiviral drug made by Pfizer, which works by inhibiting an enzyme that SARS-CoV-2 needs to make copies of itself. In other words, if that enzyme is blocked, it stops the virus from replicating properly. Trials showed that giving the drug to people in the first 5 days after COVID-19 symptoms appeared cut their chances of being hospitalized dramatically. That in turn has led healthcare authorities to clear the way for its widespread use, particularly in patients who are elderly or who are immunocompromised or who have pre-existing conditions that might put them at high risk if they contract the disease. Paxlovid treatment involves taking a lot of pills. The full course is 30 of them over 5 days. And often, by the end of it, patients are testing negative on antigen tests. But then what's called the rebound effect can complicate the picture. Most people who take those 30 pills will experience less severe symptoms than those who don't take them. But in some people, some studies say around 1 in 20, but maybe more, the disease rebounds. That means a few days after being squashed, the symptoms and viral loads can bounce back and patients can start testing positive again. That happened to my mother, for one, but it also happened to the top medical advisor in the US, Anthony Fauci. and of course, more recently, to American President Joe Biden. It's not really clear exactly why the disease can rebound. Some experts think it happens if the virus is suppressed by the medication too early in the infection, kind of denying the immune system the chance to really get to know the virus well and develop enough tools against it. Others think that some people might just harbor reservoirs of the virus in their bodies, in places that the drug can't reach. Another idea is that some people could be breaking down the drug faster than others, which would give it less time to accomplish its mission and maybe open the door to a resurgence when the pills are stopped. Regardless, the medical advice about what to do if you have a rebound case of COVID after taking Paxlovid is still really muddy. Anthony Fauci, for instance, took a second course of the drug, but my mom was told not to. Both recovered from their rebounds quickly. What everyone does agree on is that we'll need more studies to really figure out things like optimal dosage and duration of treatment.
Researchers in other countries are also developing drugs to combat the coronavirus. For example, scientists in Colombia are working on a protein-based treatment that's intended to lessen the impact of COVID-19 on the body.
When COVID-19 hit Colombia, many researchers at this biotechnology institute dropped other projects to focus on it. And one promising idea could lead to a possible therapy for the disease. It involves using blocker proteins to mimic a large enzyme called ACE2. It's where the coronavirus docks on to break in.
Once you have that knowledge, you can start cutting out the minimum necessary parts of the ACE2 protein. Those are the ones that interact with the virus's spike protein. That's how I started cutting out these sections. We've now designed about 200 different versions of what we're calling mini ACE2s.
These mini ACE2s interact with the virus in different ways. Could some of them reduce its ability to dock onto vulnerable cells? The Colombian researchers ran models of molecular dynamics and discovered promising candidates.
Our comparisons showed that 3 of those proteins were very interesting because one had 3 times the interaction strength compared to natural ACE2. The second had 20 times the strength, and the last had 40 times the interaction strength.
So the virus's spike protein binds more efficiently to the blocker proteins than it does to human cells. Could that be used to create an effective medicine? Paulino Gomez decided to support the investigation.
Back when the whole world was searching for solutions, everyone had their own ideas about the best ways to fight against SARS-CoV-2. In our lab, we were searching for small molecules that might be effective against it, but didn't have much success. I found Cesar's approach very interesting. It comes at the problem from a different angle, and we decided to go with it.
The blocker proteins are churned out by genetically engineered yeast. It's a relatively cheap technique to employ, and researchers at a nearby institute have used it to explore other proteins.
When Cesar called me and told me he had some candidates that we would work on to develop an alternative treatment for COVID-19, I looked forward to transferring our experience with other proteins, other diseases, to this much more global disease. The work could potentially have a much greater impact. That was very motivating.
The project won a local award, receiving funding that speeded up the research process. It also gave the scientists a regular income, which is far from guaranteed in Colombia. Participating in a project as ambitious as this one, which could potentially contribute to scientific knowledge in general, both on the global stage and in the current pandemic, that has given me a lot of pride. The blocker protein models that were digitally designed, then produced, will next move into testing in human cells. The researchers could hit some speed bumps at this critical stage. It isn't easy in Colombia to import the necessary reagents. The treatment would be intended for people who have active COVID infections.
It would be given to those who've been infected, so someone who's tested positive for the virus. They would receive the blocker protein to inhibit the viruses that are circulating in their bodies or that have multiplied in affected organs. The blocker would prevent those viruses from continuing to infect more cells.
The goal is to create an effective treatment for combating the coronavirus. But the research is also providing fundamental insights into a possible new approach to fighting other diseases.
We hope this episode could bring you up to date on treatments against COVID-19 and the pandemic's ongoing impact. Hope to see you again next time. Until then, take care and stay healthy.